What is up, everybody? It's your host, Drew of the Drew Experience. If you like the content for Canadian political content, geopolitics with Iran, Canada, and discipline and martial arts, make sure to hit the like, share, subscribe button on YouTube. It's free. And I have a Buy Me a Coffee link if you're feeling generous. Donations help fund production costs for independent conservative media in Canada. Today's guest, wow, I'm joined by a big one today. This one is such a big honor. She's standing at 5'1", but she's got that tall woman energy. And look at her. Look at how beautiful she looks. Look at this. This is like she's glamorous today, as Fergie said. She is a political commentator and writer, but also most important, she helps out she works for Allies for a Strong Canada in the conservative movement, the one, the only, owner of a beagle, Dimpee Brar. Welcome to the show, Dimp.
It is such a pleasure to join you, Drew. I'm so happy we were able to do this. Also, excellent introduction. Thank you.
I'm very good at hyping people up. So, obviously you've been through a lot. We were supposed to do this last week, but the timing didn't work, so we had to reschedule. I think it was for the better, honestly. Oh, the dog's barking. So even the dog wants to be on the show.
Lincoln is very excited. You're gonna have to edit that one out. Oh my gosh, 1 second.
Don't worry, I'm not gonna edit it out. This is what I love about my show. It's authentic and raw. People don't want filtered and all that. They want raw and authentic. So Lincoln, I know Lincoln, it's okay. Your owner, your fur mom, that's what all them women say today. Fur mom is having an interview right now. But if he barks, people, don't worry. There's a lot of dog lovers on the show and cat lovers, more dog lovers.
Well, excellent, because I have a dog and a cat, and obviously he's named after my favorite U.S. president. So Lincoln is doing his statesmanly duty guarding the condo door right now.
Especially in Toronto, yes, with the way the city's turning, it's like turning into Gotham, basically. I thought New York was going to turn into Gotham, but Toronto's it's well on its way.
Oh, yes, very much so. The state of Toronto, it's actually quite interesting. If there's one thing I picked up at CSFN, which was last week, that's why we couldn't make it work. I was just coming back for the Canada Strong and Free Network. I ended up getting a little ill, and by a little I mean a lot, but we're chugging along. But there's one interesting thing I noticed about the conservative movement, which is that some of the greatest and youngest defenders of conservatism are coming out of cities, usually liberal strongholds. So you have, of course, the example of Vancouver and Victoria, and you have lots of folks, a lot of conservative folks. You have Without Diminishment, the Caroline Elliott campaign. You have a lot of those young guns in the conservative movement coming out of there on the West Coast. But you also see it in Ontario, it's rare to be a conservative in Toronto, but I must say I don't feel as alone as I once did. Good news on the horizon.
Very true. And I think it's slowly starting in Quebec too, even, which is normally seen as a bloc or a liberal stronghold. We have an idea of what we want to do with a great new operations manager for Quebec, because every province has their ops managers of what they want to do with the party. But you're at CFSN, you just said that some of the strongest voices are coming from the cities, which we don't see. It's mainly from suburbs or, say, rural. But what do you think has led to this shift where younger people are going more conservative, whereas before it was always the young ones who coming out of college that were liberal or maybe progressive, but we're seeing this 180?
I think first of all, that's a great question. And it's something I've been thinking about for quite some time. So the interesting part of the reactions, the conservative reactions in a lot of these cities, we all know that the cities are really ground zero for the liberal left-wing experiments. So whether that's drug decriminalization, the breaking down of law and order, also most of these protests that we see happen, the protests against the Jewish state, I shouldn't even say the Jewish state, that's wrong, just against Jews. Let's be honest about what these protests are about. They, under the guise of anti-Zionism, they hide their Jew hatred, but Jew hatred is Jew hatred in whatever expression or manifestation it takes. Those protests often happen in the cities as well. So I think a lot of this has to do with the fact that people have been so force-fed this left-wing nonsense in the universities and the schoolings that there's just now a reaction towards it. Leftism is really unnatural when it comes to the state of man. Its views about man, highest law of the land, which is a nice way of saying there is no standard of justice in a despotism. And while there are some in our government that would love to take us in that direction, I feel greatly, greatly honored, white pilled, as the kids would like to say, about where the state of conservatism is going. And you saw this at CSFN, actually.
That's very true. I mean, I was at the convention in Calgary and lots of young people. There wasn't just your typical like Gen X or baby boomer. What I saw in Calgary was a ton of millennials, my age. I'm not that old. I'm 34, but I have the mentality of a 17-year-old. It's just a number. A lot of younger millennials from 1995 to say 99, and a ton of Gen Zers that are just in Canada that are just, they just feel like they can't, their concerns are not being heard by the Liberal Party, which has become, listen, a lot of people are going to disagree with it, but a party of this Laurentian elite, and this rich club that you can't be a part of.
Oh, 100%. And we saw it also in Poilievre's election, the coalition that came together towards him. There really is a major shift happening. And I note there was a fact that Tristan Hopper mentioned, and I wish I had the actual citation, but he had actually mentioned something interesting, an observation he had made regarding Remembrance Day ceremonies, that they've actually started to show an increase in the amount of participants that show up, and those participants are often younger. So I see that in the mainstream media. I shouldn't even call it mainstream. In the state media, we often hear that the conservatism among the new generation or among the youth is really a consequence of affordability or economic issues. And I do believe that that absolutely has a role to play. But I think there's a larger vision or a picture that they're missing. They believe, these people today, who are, again, our generation younger, I still like to believe we're young, they see that the promise of the nation has not been fulfilled for them. And affordability and the ability to own a home, to be able to have a kind of economic freedom and prosperity is really just a symptom of a larger problem. You see their reaction to immigration in the same way. If you take it all together, the children or the youth are really reacting to what I take to be a kind of nihilism. And the nihilism here is really been the result of this multicultural idea where all ways of life are equal. And that sounds like a recipe for peace, you know? What could possibly go wrong if we're all equal? Well, the problem is that the idea that all ways are equal, or that they should be tolerated as equal, is a Western idea. So in order to believe that, you must believe that the Western way of life is actually supreme. And I do believe that the Western way of life is supreme. I believe it offers the fullest, greatest expression and act of human flourishing for all peoples and all ways of life. But we seem to have forgotten that, you know, we think Western civilization is just one quote-unquote culture among many, and we're learning the hard way that there are enemies to our way of life who understand us in a way that perhaps we have forgotten, who know that we stand above all for liberty and equality, and that those things are revolutionary in human thought, you know. Outside of the Western civilization, in our little garden, it really is a state of war, and there are peoples and ways of life and ideas especially that despise nothing more than the ideas of liberty and equality, because it means that their ways of life will become leveled or destroyed overnight. Leftism, globalism, the CCP, Islam, take whatever you will. They all have the same origin and the same animus, and that is against Western civilization.
Very, very interesting there, you said, especially when it comes to this sudden rebrand of communism, which really concerns me, because when we were growing up we're not old, but we understand this because our parents taught us it. We understood that communism was dead. Like, we thought, okay, like capitalism, democracy, this is the way to go. Okay, and we're not full on capitalist like, say, the US is. We're like what's called a mixed market economy. But then with the cost of living, Dimpee, we're seeing a lot of this rebrand, or with the streamers like, say, Hassan Piker, the election of Mamdani, and the latest election of Avi Lewis in the NDP, that are trying to bring this radical, socialism, but it's really communism when you take the mask off. And what's your thoughts on communism and socialism trying to make this comeback where they try to put lipstick on a pig, so to say?
Well, it's very interesting. I actually wrote an article about this for the Federalist, and it was basically what you're describing is the Red-Green Alliance, which is the kind of unholy covenant made between Islam and the left. Communism, Marxism, whatever you call it. I just call it leftism because it captures all of them in one. And you're right. The interesting part is this. You see, the left thinks that they can control Islam. They think it's just more matter for their project of emancipation. And they're very flattered by it as well, you know, because let's not kid ourselves. The left in many ways is way more racist than anything that the right could ever imagine. And one of the ways that it shows is that they're very flattered by the idea that those who come from the Middle East or those who come from the Islamic world or way of life, you know, for the left, those people are considered backwards. They're considered patriarchal. They're everything that the left seems to hate. They're very flattered by the idea that this people who they would consider backwards are now speaking in their tongue, you know, of colonization, of oppression, of injustice. So they think on one hand they can control it and they're very flattered by it. The other aspect, which is a lot more nefarious, is that the left is using Islam essentially as a kind of brown shirt militia, a proletariat army against the West. You see, our academics in the universities preach and give little speeches where they think that they're being quite bold by calling for action, quote unquote, political action, and really what is just violence and terrorism. Well, they've now found a group that actually does hate Western civilization as much as the left does, and the difference is that they have the boldness and the desire to act upon it. So we're in a very, very dangerous position right now, but make no mistake, Islam is using leftism as a Trojan horse to enter into the West. And if the left honestly thinks that it's going to win when it comes out ultimately against the Islamic way of life, they have another thing coming. As the Shah taught us, the Shah's deposition taught us in the 70s in Iran, that too was the result of the Red-Green Alliance. And as I said in my article, the Muslims did not become, or the Islamic way of life did not become more progressive. The progressives just became corpses, and that's going to happen.
That's very true with Iran. Like, look what happened. You know, all these lefties are saying, oh, the Shah's a dictator, you know, this and that. He's a bad hombre and all that. And then you find out that the Shah, like, he had a famous video where he's like, the people need to, there's a famous video, and I'm paraphrasing, where he's like, the problem with the left, it goes, we need to understand these people. We just need to understand their way of life and all that. And then the leftists found out the hard way because, you know, when the Ayatollah, you know, came into power and, well, took power over it's not a revolution. It was a coup of my late father's country. I'm tired of people saying it was a revolution. It was a coup. Like Iran, look at Iran from the 60s and the 70s up to 79. And when you see what happened after, the Ayatollah said, oh, we have no use for the lefties and the commies. We're going to kill them all. We're going to execute them all. So it's a very unholy alliance that where the Islamists, I want to make that clear because, you know, these are the bad apples when it comes to that. Like, it's like if you're reading, by the way, I want to promote Warren Kinsella's The Hidden Hand on Anti-Semitism. I'm 200 pages in. Please buy it. Even if for those, you know, Warren, you know, he's a classical liberal. But I think, you know, people should read this book because it really shows you this unholy alliance and how they're using online, Dimpee, not just in academia, but how they're weaponizing social media on Gen Z especially. And we're seeing this again.
100%. Also, I also love Mr. Kinsella's new book. I have my copy and I haven't unfortunately started reading it, but I'm very much looking forward to it because one, Mr. Kinsella has been a friend to the Jewish people. That is for sure, a stalwart defender. And also, number two, he noticed something that, again, I'm shocked that our state media, shocked I say, didn't want to cover it, which is that this pushback, not even a pushback, these protests against the Jewish people are very well organized and very, very well funded. And one of the things that Allies for a Strong Canada does, it is arm Normie and Norma, the kind of everyday citizens, to be armed and to be able to directly push back against their politicians, against their members of parliament, because unfortunately, Our politicians listen to these groups because they're the most obnoxious factions. They are the loudest, they have a lot of money, and they're very well organized. But that does not mean that the truth is on their side. That does not mean that they are mightier than we are. And that doesn't mean that the strength of their arguments are greater than we are. They just happen to be funded by some of the worst actors, and who, again, have one single theme and animus, which is the destruction of Western civilization as a whole. The enemies to the Jewish people, the enemies to the free Iranian people are the enemies of the West everywhere. And a threat to liberty anywhere is a threat to liberty everywhere.
I definitely agree, and it's something that really changed, that really opened my eyes was, because listen, I'm the kind of person that's very, like, I try to meet people halfway. Like, look, regardless, like, what happened with October 7th was tragic, like, I have family that live in Israel, they weren't harmed, but I can understand those who were affected by it. And, I'm someone that tried to, like, look at both sides. Let's put the tribalism aside, and I try to be a bit of a Yitzhak Rabin, because I have friends on the other side as well that, that might be sympathetic to Palestinian suffrage, which I get it. Like, look, as I said, I try to be a centrist in that regard. But what really shocked me, Dimpee, was when January 8th and 9th happened in Iran, when 40,000 estimated or more, we just don't know the exact numbers. I saw a lot of people's true colors, how when they looked at me and my father's people who are Iranian and my friends as if we are less than dog feces under the shoe. Because why? Is it because like you don't care about Iranians? Like, why were you protesting? If you were so loud for Gaza and whatnot, and I'm not afraid to say it anymore, but you were silent for Iranians being massacred in hospitals. And you, Clay, and you know what? I don't want to hear your duplicity. You can unfollow me. If you could not share one thing about what happened in Iran, and my bar is very low when it comes to expecting from people, but you were saying, oh, I'm anti-war, this and that. You have no right to tell me what to think about geopolitics. You have no right to tell any Iranian what to feel. And I hope, just as it's a message to all those, I hope you never have to live under an oppressive government where you have to beg the outside world for intervention like we have. So when you say, oh, Israel and Trump, be careful. We understand that they have their interests. But at the same time, I hope you never have to go through what we had to go through. I had friends, you've had friends or others. I lost 3 friends because they gave their life for freedom. I have friends in other ways that the stuff they tell me, it is a miracle that I haven't broken down. I know I'm going on a tangent, but it's like you did strike a nerve there, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because we have to call out the duplicity, and I'm fed up of it. Call it for what it is. Like, listen, I tried being a centrist on both sides. I've tried to be that statesman, but if you can't put yourself in my shoes and what I'm seeing and what my family on my father's side has to see, I don't want to hear a single thing about what about you trying to Iran-splain to me. I'm fed up of it like many other Iranians are.
Well, I think it's because fundamentally Iran, what was happening in Iran is a very inconvenient fact for a lot of these people. Because again, Iran did not begin in 1979. The Ayatollah would like for it to be that way, that was really the beginning of it. That is not it. This is a civilization that goes back centuries and thousands of years. They are the people who Herodotus makes special focus to in his histories when he's speaking about the Greek and he's speaking about the Persians. And again, the great tragedy of Iran is the following. There are many places in this world where man is born a slave. And to them, liberty is such a radical idea that they can't actually stand the thought of it. It seems too much for them to bear. But the tragedy of Iran is this. This is a free people who have been subjugated into tyranny and into enslavement. And anyone who knows, who believes in freedom, who believes in the sacredness of liberty, again, who believes that man is born free and equal, knows that a free man can never submit. A free man can never submit to tyranny. It is impossible. And that's why it requires so much force, egregious force, on the part of the Iranian government. And let's be clear about who that is, the mullahs and the clerics and the army itself. That's why it requires such force. So I would just say to the Iranian people who are listening, and hope that they understand that the free world always stands with the free Iran. We believe in a free Iran. That they should take solace, if they can, in the idea that it takes such might and such force and such tyranny to put them down, because that's really a living testament to how free they really are. A free people requires great force and fear in order to be subjugated, and I'm happy to see that Iran has never taken that lightly, and I hope to see by the end of the Trump administration a free Iran.
Thank you. You just want a bunch of supporters on X and Instagram. Probably you have to make that a clip and be like, and then your following's gonna blow up. But when it comes to another thing too, when it comes to the left is, I'm not against feminism. Like, I mean, like, look, I'm for women suffrage. I'm for women empowerment. I just want to say this: Iranian women have proven that they're the real feminists over Western ones. And I don't care if that makes me, if that offends anyone. They took bullets, they took being unalived, assaulted, you name it, and they're still fighting, and not wearing the hijab. And if that doesn't amaze a Western feminist, I think you guys need to just cool it a bit. And I'm allowed to say that because I'm half Iranian, and at the end of the day, no one's gonna, it's Iran-splain. What's your thoughts on that, the duplicity when it comes to this Western feminism and the Iranian women?
Well, again, the Western feminists, because they're leftists and born through that tradition, they ally with Islam because they too hate Western civilization. That was a product of it. But I will say that I don't want to call the Iranian women feminists, because I feel like it's actually degrading to what they're like. I actually think they're more consistent with the idea of women in the West. Mm-hmm. Aristotle, in his book on politics, in the very first book 1 of Politics, he only ever gives one definition of the distinction between the Greeks and the barbarians. And it's a beautiful distinction that I always keep in mind. And I think you can use it to describe the difference between Western civilization and all else. And of course I believe that the Persians are a part and parcel of Western civilization. If you believe in the creed of liberty and equality, you are one of us. What the definition he provides is the following: what separates the Greek from the barbarian is, for the barbarian, woman is slave. And fundamentally, only in Western civilization is woman free. Feminism is actually quite destructive of that principle, because in many ways, what it promised was liberation, and what it really gave us was enslavement. Enslavement to the market, enslavement to politics, enslavement to many ways of life that have actually ended up subjugating woman to a second-class citizen, rather than who she should really be. Woman, as a whole in Western civilization, is the guardian of all mores. If you want to see the health and the morality of any society or regime, look to its women. So when the Iranian women take liberty to be exactly what it is, which is sacred above all else, they are following in a tradition of Lucrece, of Virginia, of some of the greatest women in Western civilization. And it doesn't surprise me at all that that nation so yearns for freedom when its women so obviously love it. I believe it's part of their motto, is it not?
I think so, yeah. Women, life, freedom, you mean?
Yes, women.
Yeah, but now the women are not using that because there was like some bad actors that infiltrated that movement. So now it's just basically Payende Iran, which means free Iran, and Javed Shah, which is long live the king, or the king will return.
I see that. Oh, very interesting. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So now to take it to Canada now, because, I don't want to focus on Iran because we're living in Canada, but we still love our maple Iranians, our Canadian Iranians. They're fighting. We should have won. I mean, listen, I don't want to say we should have. That sounds entitled. We could have won. Where do you feel the conservatives did good in election 2025? But where should they have improved? Or what could they have done better in what was a pretty big shocker of a result?
It's very funny that you should ask this. Now, of course, I am no expert, so obviously I'm going to tell you everything that I think, because that's the hallmark of a non-expert, is to give opinions. But what they did do well is that there is a new coalition, and this is a new conservative party. And I'm glad to see it, The Conservative Party used to have the image of a kind of stodgy, stultified, unwilling to change, rigid, not very open to new ideas and new arguments. What I love about this new Conservative Party, which I noticed at the Canada Strong and Free Network, is that we are actually having debates and discussions on what the future Conservative vision and party looks like. The Liberals do not have such discussions. As I said to you while we were offline, but for the Liberals, the only debate they have is, do we want 0% free speech or 0.01% free speech? It's a matter of degree. They do not have questions about whether we should push more cultural, quote unquote, issues, whether we should be more economic. Only among conservatives do we even have these debates anymore, which to me is far more indicative of a free society and a free regime than anything else. I actually look at the Liberal Party as a party of tyranny at this point, because that's what they seek. They seek one-party rule, they seek total conformity, and by any means necessary, by force or by fraud, as we saw with the floor crossers. And again, they select their leaders, we elect our leaders, which means we are far more dependent upon the people in the grassroots movement and listening to them than the Liberals are. The Liberals like to tell the people what they need to believe and hear. We actually listen to the people as to what they hear and then shape policy accordingly. So that is one advantage. Now, what could they have done differently? I know that the usual argument is that Trump somehow lost the election for Polyev by pulling the 51st state stuff. I will confess something to you, which is the first time I'm doing this publicly. I am now more skeptical and suspicious of that idea than I ever was before. I'm not so sure that that was the case. And I'm not sure because I don't think that that was enough to get people to go from conservative to liberal, to make an actual switch. If I were to say anything or to give any kind of advice, again, I may know nothing, so I know nothing, and a proud know nothing, I suppose. If I could have said anything to the Conservative Party, it would have been this: you are not going to out anti-American the Liberal Party of Canada. But what you can do, you don't have to go pro-American, you do not need to go pro-Trump, but you could have hit them, especially Carney, where it hurts, which is China. Canada has a very interesting statistic about it, a little fun fact that I love to share when I can. Canada, among all G7 nations, has the by polling record over the past decade has shown the most significant antipathy against the Communist Party of China among any G7 nation. And we're looking at numbers of upwards of 73% of the population is in total disagreement and against the CCP and views it as an existential threat. Now, I know that anti-American sentiment has risen. I understand that. But some of the polling on this, this was quite robust polling. And I don't simply believe that Canadians have all of a sudden become more favorable to the Communist Party of China. If you notice that the polling that does take place now, it usually replaces the Communist Party of China with just China, period. That's a very different question to ask whether one is in favor of China, because of course, we have no qualms with the Chinese people. We too believe that China should be free. We too believe that the promise of liberty and equality should extend to the people of China. They too are suffering under a great despotism and tyranny, and I think especially of the diaspora communities in Canada, who are the greatest targets of the CCP after all. Very similar to the Iranian community. Those are the people who suffer, not the Laurentian elite. They're going to be okay. And so I would love to see more polling on that, but my instinct is moving forwards to push on China. This is something that Canadians abhor, and they instinctively have a feeling for it because as creatures of Western civilization, we are sensitive to those who suffer under tyrannies and despotisms. And I don't think Canadians have actually lost that instinct. I just believe it must be articulated in the proper fashion. So really, my advice would be, don't play by the Liberals' rules. Don't play in their playground of Trump versus no Trump, America versus no America. Touch and push them where it hurts, which is their obvious connections to the CCP, the very fact that we still do not know what is in the signed memorandums that our Prime Minister signed with the CCP. We know that through Operation Fox Hunt, these kinds of memorandums, especially when it concerns exchange of intelligence, has to do with the diaspora communities. Drew, there's a very ugly part about all this. because to many of these bad actors, whether it's the IRGC or the CCP, what they're essentially saying is that they believe that just because someone by some accident of birth is born in either Iran or China, that when they become citizens of Canada, they still belong to Iran or China, to those despotisms, and not to Canada. Well, I believe as a Canadian that those are my citizens, and those are my citizens first, and so it's our duty to protect and preserve them, because if we can't preserve and protect them, who knows who else they will come for. And they deserve freedom from tyranny, because that is the promise of Western civilization and Canada. And that's something, to our eternal shame, that Ottawa is not supporting and is clearly not serious about.
Yeah, I mean, you just touched on China, and I want to get your thoughts. Then back in the election, we've met Joe Tay. Probably he was a candidate that I think should have won the definition of a hero and a patriot. So, Joe, if you ever want to, Joe's supposed to come on my show, but it's always timing with him. He is so in demand and whatnot. But what was your thoughts on the Joe Tay situation, where the Liberal candidate said basically, put a bounty on him and bring him, paraphrasing, put a bounty on him and bring him to a Chinese police station, and then just the non-response from our now Prime Minister?
I will be very honest with you on what I think what should have happened. That man should have been expelled, deported, and completely kicked out of the country. To put your fellow citizen at the risk of a tyranny, to suggest that, what do we think happens in a Chinese prison exactly? That you would even suggest that, or feel comfortable or confident enough to suggest it, tells me a lot about the state of our nation, and tells me a lot about the foothold that the CCP had in said writing. It was an absolute disgrace, and again, to our eternal shame, that wasn't dealt with properly. I mean, in the strongest sense, the man who was responsible for that, and the Liberal Party itself, committed what I take to be nothing less than treason. That is an act of war against a citizen and our own nation. To put them in harm's way like that because they think differently than you, because they are against tyranny. Well, if to be against tyranny means that one should be arrested by the Chinese, then every single Canadian citizen should be arrested by the CCP. And if that's what they think of Canadians who view that way, then we have a much, much bigger problem on our hands than is being transmitted to the Canadian people. Because again, if they can do that to someone who is running for a member of parliament seat, what are they going to do to everyday Canadians when they get the chance?
Very true. We're seeing that with like the construction of Chinese police stations, where this is not China. If like they're doing that, that's going to get what's next. The IRGC puts up like little IRGC police stations. It's very disgraceful that the Liberals have like turned a blind eye to us, but they're claiming that Conservatives are bringing MAGA politics into the North. And I know that offends a few, but why are people like Joe Tay and the Chinese diaspora subject to tyranny and intimidation from foreign powers? This is why it's such a big problem, Dimpee, when I echo, we have a foreign, it's like Canada has become a playground for nefarious actors, be it the CCP, the IRGC. I mean, even to a degree, like I even heard that the cartels are kind of within Canada with the money laundering. And it's like every day, it's like you're finding out something new. And it's like, what's going on to our country? I thought we were highly regarded as like one of the quiet middle powers that was taking care of our business.
Oh, absolutely. We've become the plaything of some of the worst foreign actors and foreign organizations. And that comes to mean one thing and one thing only. We are surrendering our sovereignty in real time. When we have in a party or a prime minister, anybody at this point, who is so fearful of domestic turmoil or electoral punishment because of fear of one faction or another, let alone foreign factions, then what has happened is that our prime minister and this party is no longer thinking of Canadians as a whole, because of course he must govern and rule on behalf of those who also did not choose to elect him. He doesn't just rule or govern on behalf of the Liberals who voted for him. He owes it to all of us as Canadians, because this is a responsible government, which means he must respond to us. The people rule here, last time I checked, not the party and not one individual. So by doing that, Canada has now become an open place of warfare. You are absolutely correct. The cartels are here. They work in tandem with the IRGC, just as they work in tandem with the CCP. And Sam Cooper does phenomenal reporting on this. This is something that has been known, by the way, to our intelligence agencies as well as the RCMP, with no action so far. And again, I would like to ask people the following. If they can act without such fear of consequences in this nation, and they can do so with essentially cover and permission from our government, where does that leave the everyday Canadian? If they can disappear, harm, and intimidate those who are dissidents, what can they do to everyday Canadians? This is not simply a threat against the diaspora communities. This is a threat against Canadians as a whole. And I think it's very important that we start to act as one nation. You know, there is nothing that these foreign actors and organizations love more than this nation to be entirely divided. I often wonder how much the CCP must enjoy the fact that we have now made the United States a wedge issue, and we act as if we are in this kind of separate, distinct bubble from them. They must love that. Our enemies love the idea of a divided Western civilization because it makes us very easy to conquer.
Do you picture, and this is very hyperbolic, but I've watched Red Dawn enough times in my life, and I'm not talking about the remake, I'm talking about the original 1984 one where the Soviets and the Cubans invaded the US. Could you picture a scenario with technology, with the division, that this would allow some sort of a, nefarious actor shadow invasion where it's like we become like this, it's like the government, like, I hate to say it, but they become like bought off or whatnot, like MPs become bought off by these actors, and then we're kind of being ruled by like some sort of an underworld technocracy, basically, if that makes sense.
Well, actually, it's worse because Red Dawn still presupposed that conquest would have to take physical means. So it would have to take military means or means through violence. But when you look at, for instance, the actions of the IRGC or the CCP or leftism as a whole, because again, they're all against Western civilization. They are all animated by the same spirit. They put all their differences aside with that one goal and end in mind. To do this without firing a shot, because they cannot fight the United States militarily or economically. They can't do that on that plane. So they have to do it through public opinion and through these quote-unquote psyops, all right? So that is why the CCP has its own method of economic warfare. That is its way of conquering people through debt traps, through patronages. That's what it's really doing. So when our Prime Minister is open to investment or allowing for EV dumps for those little spy cars, which I would just like to point out, there is very little bipartisan support in the United States with Trump between Democrats and Republicans. Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Party is actually in agreement with the Trump administration on not allowing those EVs to cross through the United States as a national security threat. So I don't know how many times you've seen bipartisan support among Americans on a subject, but this is one of them. And they understand rightfully that the CCP would like to conquer without firing a shot. They do absolutely corrupt and bribe officials. I mean, we have open members like Senator Wu in our Canadian Senate that are open supporters of the Communist Party of China, and they don't hide it anymore. And on top of that, we have a Prime Minister who signed what he calls a memorandum of understanding with their intelligence officials and their security officials. We don't even know what's in there. Do you realize how much of a national security threat that is? National security is supposed to be beyond party. That is not liberal or conservative. That's not left versus right. That is the security and self-preservation of a nation which belongs to all. It is incumbent upon the Prime Minister to release the information there, because the longer time goes on, the more suspicious it gets. Did he sell out our diaspora communities for a trade deal? And for what kind of trade deal, might I add? Because whatever it is, it's not worth it. Free trade is for free nations. No one has ever thought that we should trade with those who, let alone despise us, seek to conquer us through economic means. And I will say, we have another interesting problem in Canada. A lot of our First Nations communities have been very happy and open to engage with the CCP. And that can come through research, quote unquote, partnerships, money, anything you can imagine, investment. And that is something we need to be on the lookout for. That is an open act of war against the West and against Canada. And we cannot have groups or individuals in this nation who are openly working and engaging with a hostile adversary, which is quite clear in its universal ambitions and its imperial ambitions, which states openly that the West is not some rival but an enemy to their way of life. That cannot be tolerated, that cannot be accepted. It is not Canadian first.
What you're seeing too is what Sam Cooper reported, I'm not sure if it's him, but I saw it, that China, in the deal, this MOU that our Prime Minister signed, they're buying up mines. And it's like, those jobs aren't going to Canadians. It's like, that's a security threat right there. That's economic and security. Those are our resources. Why is China coming in there? Why are these Chinese companies coming in there, buying them up for pennies on the dollar or whatnot? And this is where, like, it's like, I'm starting to really see, Dimpee, like, what are we trying to do here? Like, with this, not getting a Kuzma deal, because my assumption is, and this is just my opinion, I'm not an expert like you are, because I know nothing. My guess is when people wake up and see what's going on, it's going to be crazy. Because do you remember that report that came out that Joe Worthington said that in a few years, Canada is going to become like a techno-feudalist state? Like, we already have it. Like, people are going to be like scrounging for food as if like we're hunters and gatherers again. Like, we're becoming indentured techno serfs. That's what I feel this MOU is going to lead to, amongst other things. Like, what's Canada turning into? Like, I can understand why people are leaving because of the brain drain going on.
And I'm also very concerned because, look, the United States is not our foe. It is a great friend. People speak about relationships and alliances. What we share with the United States is beyond any kind of alliance or relationship or trade agreement. Those are our friends. Our men died together on the beaches of Normandy. Our enemies, those Nazis, did not distinguish between maple leaves and stars and stripes. They understood something that we have forgotten, which is that freedom-loving people, in essence, are the same everywhere. This was supposed to be an opportunity under the Trump administration to construct what they like to call, and which I now love as a phrase, a fortress North America. Between Canada and the United States, as a kind of fortress North America, we could have actually been the shining city on a hill, the light of freedom the world over, and a shared understanding of the threat posed by China on this continent if we could push them out together. Between Canada and the United States, we would be unrivaled, and we would put to an end any kind of strategy the CCP had to get a foothold in North America. Because I would like to point out to everybody, if the CCP continues what it's doing in its capture of Canada, it will then become a major national security threat to the United States. Do we really believe that President Trump is going to allow a Chinese vassal state to occupy its northern border, let alone the Arctic? Are we kidding here? That is the beginning of the end for Canada. And all I can understand that the United States seeks is the sovereignty and the security of Canada as a free nation, because it is in their interest that we remain sovereign and secure. So I will never ever understand the idea of turning against our friend, our long-standing friend, brothers in blood. Drew, there are places in Europe where the bloods of Canadian American soldiers have given rise to flowers, to grass, to everything there. We have watered those shores together. And the idea that because we have some people in this nation who have a terminal case of Trump derangement syndrome, for which there is clearly no vaccine or cure, that we are willing to forego our greatest friend to go into the arms of a tyrannical regime, this is absolutely unacceptable. And quite frankly, there should be protests and riots in the street because of it. What Mr. Carney is doing is the most radical act ever taken in Canadian political history, which is to wrest us away from Western civilization where we belong and to take us to the tyrannical East. Canada cannot stand for that, and I don't believe that most Canadians do stand for that.
I believe and that's why we're glad we have people like you, the conservatives such as Michelle Ferreri, who's been an ardent, like Michelle says, like to people, don't leave, fight. If you give up, you're never going to know what you accomplish. And it's better to go out fighting than to like just pack it in and leave Canada, because that's going to lead to further brain drain. Question of censorship, you're a political commentator, you're a writer. This is something that it's a hill I die on. Like, I believe in freedom of press. I believe in freedom of independent media, whether you agree with them or not. This is not Communist Party China. This is not the Soviet Union, last I checked. This is Canada. My family came here, and I know people are going to say, oh, you're overthinking it. It's not that. When when NordVPN, the other one, Toby Luque of Shopify, amongst other tech CEOs, come out and say, these bills are insanely draconian and authoritarian, Houston, we have a problem.
100%. Look, I often write for U.S. publications. So here's the funny thing. When I write something for the Federalist, let's say, I can't even share it. This is without the bill coming through. I can't even share it on my Instagram because the content won't show up. And I would like your listeners to understand that the truest form of tyranny is when there is no alternative in thought or in mind. And that's what this is really about. When you monopolize thought and insist on total conformity of thought without any alternatives to said thought or those ideas, that is the truest tyranny that's possible. That's how you really control a population. And I am incredibly concerned, as you are, that the freedom of the press and freedom of speech, really freedom of thought is what we're talking about, is in great turmoil and is at great risk in Canada. I must say that I fear that what we have witnessed without understanding it is a regime change in Canada with Mr. Carney's new leadership. Whether that is the false majority that he now has in power, which by the way means that he's less responsive to the people. Now he really doesn't need to care about the electorate. He can do whatever he wants. He has a quote-unquote mandate. To now the crackdown on free press, as well as the crackdown on religions. Let's not forget what they were doing as well by calling certain aspects of the Bible hate speech. I mean, who knew Jesus was still so dangerous in the year of our Lord 2026, but apparently a very hateful man according to our government.
That's according to Mark Miller, who I just want to say, Mark, I have pity for you because you must have been bullied as a child. And I'm sorry that no one ever hugged you to say that you mean something, because I think he's doing this out of spite. I mean, it's really, it's like I hear him talking. I'm like, this is a man that just hates everything that's Canadian.
He is very clearly a believer in the, quote, post-national state, which is that Canada belongs to everyone but Canadians. Essentially, that's what that means. It's everyone's identity except our own. And this, again, this is not a recipe, this is not politics as usual. This is not business as usual. This is why I have become far more outspoken. Drew, I was very happy living in my little condo with my dog and my cat, not getting involved in politics, watching from the sidelines. My brother was really the one who was out in front center. But something happened with the election of Mark Carney, and we just cannot simply remain silent anymore. The nation is in crisis, and I have to say, and I will repeat this ad nauseum, I used to have these delusions where I thought that we would get help. Maybe the British would come to us. Maybe the Americans would come help us. And they are trying to help. But there is a limit to that, Drew. If anyone's going to help or save this nation, it's going to be Canadians. It will have to come from within. So I agree with Miss Ferreri's idea as well. Socrates had a saying, which is not abandon your post. They want you to leave. The same thing happened in Democrat-run cities as they happen in liberal cities in Canada. They want you to leave. They want to make it so that you don't want to be in the cities, because those are the electoral strongholds you have to win. And how convenient when the cities become totally leftist. It makes their jobs during election season very, very easy. And if nothing else, I do not like to make the left's life easy.
Same. I mean, for me, you said it was the election of Carney. My come to Jesus or come to Moses moment, I'm Jewish after all, so I don't, we joke around. His comedy is not subjective. You're just not funny to anyone that gets offended by that. And like for my come to conservatism moment was the Freedom Convoy. Whether you agreed with the truckers or not, I'm not here to debate that. The use of the Emergencies Act was so heinous to me. I do not want to hear, well, the truckers were volatile, this and that. Listen, it all could have been squashed if then Prime Minister Trudeau went to speak with them, whether he agrees with them or not. When that act was enacted, freezing of bank accounts, whatever they also did, it ruined Canada's reputation almost, like internationally. Like it really put us it dug us a big hole economically and internationally to do that. And then with the election of Carney too, and you hear about we're gonna bring this law in, Bill C2, to check your mail. We're gonna see if you have over 10,000 in cash. Where Bill C22 zombified what's to come maybe of Bill 6C63, which is probably Bill C. This is listen, my mother's side did not, she was born in Canada, my late mother, but her family did not flee then to be communist Belarus under the Soviet rule. And my father's side, who left Iran because they saw the Islamic coup was going to happen when they did truck runs because of the trucking company that they used to leave Tehran. They would go to Qom, and my great uncle said, "This is not going to last. There's something that's going to happen here." They did not leave these countries for me to relive a light version of that. The fact that the Emergencies Act was used, and then and with all these bills, it's like as if the Liberal Party of today is playing footsie with authoritarianism, and it's very dangerous because if you don't understand the history of where that leads, I hate to break it to you, it's not good. And I think everyone should read a history book of where this will lead.
100%. Tyrannies are not something that you can get out of very quickly. They require tremendous amounts of force just to get out of. So it's best to nip it in the bud where it first shines. And I think that's really the key here, is to make a lot of noise. I always speak of a silent majority, but it's time that we not be so silent anymore. That's part of the problem. Our Canadian politeness has made it so that we just quietly observe and let these things happen. Well, we cannot afford to do this anymore. And I'm, again, extremely concerned about the nation, particularly as USMCA negotiations are approaching. I am not one for economic arguments usually. I believe in the political over the economic, but I will say this. The nation is already at an economic precipice. If you can't see it, you don't need to be an expert, actually, Drew. We don't need to be experts. All you need are 2 eyes and 2 ears and a grocery cart to see how expensive life has gotten in Canada. This is unsustainable, Drew. There is a limit to this ideology, and I'm extremely concerned that our Prime Minister is not even serious about a deal anymore. His behavior does not betray someone who is serious about reaching out to the President and negotiating a deal. And I would be very unamused if I were to find out that Mr. Carney lied while he was campaigning. He said that he would diversify trade, but he never said divorce us from U.S. trade. And those are 2 entirely different things. And we are quickly approaching a point where Mexico has a trade agreement and we do not. And as it now stands, this nation will not be able to continue if we do not have a trade negotiation complete by July. It does not help our case to be inviting those like Alex Soros and Barack Obama into the nation, which is, again, not just thumbing your nose at the president, but really poking him in the eye. I am not sure what strategy this exactly is. I have yet to see anyone poke Trump repeatedly and gain anything positive out of it. And I, again, don't understand why we're poking a friend and not a foe. Perhaps we should poke Mr. Xi in the eyes a little more, and we would have a better understanding of where this nation is and should be going.
And then you don't have all these separatist movements coming up, like in Alberta or Quebec now even. It's really like, look, it's like I'm against separatism because I just hurts everything. But at the same time, I can understand. I'm not sympathizing, and I want to make it very clear. I am pro-federalist. I want a united Canada to be strong. But I can understand the grievances for why some are thinking this. And we have to start, instead of neglecting them and thumbing our noses at them, bring them to the table to have that conversation, to nip it in the rear before it metastasizes into a stage for national cancer that is going to be close to impossible to fix.
Yes, if you look at it carefully, I often have opinions which run contrary to the mainstream, which should be of no surprise throughout this conversation. One of my most controversial opinions, which I did share on Elevate with Josh, was the following. I believe that Carney's coalition and the state of the nation is in such crisis that it's a lot weaker than it appears, When you are faced not only with USMCA negotiations, which might go sour, we are in a new world order partnership with China, and at the same time we have two provinces which are flirting openly with the idea of secession, it doesn't actually matter, Drew, whether they succeed in their vote or not. The very fact that they are open to this and it's happening at the same time is a kind of sign of where the state of the nation is. And we are not one Canada right now. Like you, I am also a federalist. I believe in one Canada above all else. But guess what? I do sympathize with both the Quebecers as well as the Albertans. I believe many of their grievances are absolutely true, and I believe that they must be met. The idea that Ottawa is not speaking to them when they are such integral parts of this nation is, to me, absolutely, I cannot understand it. And in the case of Alberta in particular, I must say, we have been asking that province, from what I can understand, to subsidize their own suicide. Why would they do that? Why on earth would anyone agree to that? They are rational. And I must say that the Quebecers and the Albertans, they're like a weather vane. They understand that there is a crisis in this nation, and I do not believe it's a coincidence that this is happening under Mr. Carney's ruling and governorship. This is a very, very serious situation for the nation. It is unprecedented in our history, and it is a major political crisis. Any one of these issues would be considered a moment of crisis in our history. To have them all at once, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's incredible. The nation is really falling apart at its seams, and it's, again, incumbent upon Canadians to take the reins. That's the only place where the solution is going to come from.
Very true. It's been such a dark conversation. People are going to be like, oh my God, Dimpee, what's the hope you have with because listen, yes, it's a very, very fractured majority that he has, but I do believe there's some silver linings, and there's always some opportunities where we can improve and but take the reins and actually get some small W's that compound into bigger W's. So what are your thoughts on how and where can the Tories and conservative movement in Canada start, getting some wins and build off those wins that are long lasting?
Well, I actually, despite all the doom and gloom, I'm a pathological optimist, I'm a happy warrior. Fear is the instrument of tyrannies and tyrants, so I do not fear anything except God. I do not fear any men, and that includes our Prime Minister or any kind of organization or any kind of foreign despotism. It is, quite frankly, beneath contempt that free men and free women fear. You leave that to our enemies, we don't need to do that. I see great promise in the nation. I actually see us on the verge of what I consider a kind of conservative renaissance. You see it out west in Vancouver, and you're starting to see it on the East Coast, and you're starting to see it across the nation. I believe that because of these issues that Mr. Carney is facing in what I considered a very, very weak majority, a very fragile coalition, what goes up must come down, and his reign is not eternal or forever. There will come a time when he he is on the downward. And I think we are actually seeing some signs of that. I will ask your listeners and your viewers to consider the following. Howard Lutnick made comments about how Canada didn't seem to have any kind of strategy towards USMCA. We all of a sudden saw Mr. Carney come out and talk about USMCA at length. In fact, he hasn't stopped speaking about USMCA at length. We've even heard little flip-flops like, to paraphrase him, that instead of it being a weakness, instead of our partnership with the United States being a weakness, well, now we actually need greater cooperation and embeddedness between the two. So you're starting to see certain conciliatory changes and gestures being made. I'm not saying that they're perfectly aligned, but there are certain subtle shifts happening. And I will say this is the longest period that Mr. Carney has spoken about any topic consistently at length. He is very sensitive about this issue, and I believe the best way to do it is to keep pointing and pushing him towards this question. Are you serious about getting a deal and securing a deal with the United States, or are you not? Because I think this is something that he understands was his central promise, his central electoral promise that really got him elected, that essentially he would be able to negotiate a better deal with Mr. Trump than Mr. Poilievre could. And we're now starting to see that kind of fall away. And I must say, the Canadian people are not stupid. I believe, like the customer, the voter is always right. And they gave Mr. Carney an opportunity, but patience is wearing thin. There's only so long that we can allow him, and his electorate can allow him, to continue playing these games without seeing any results. Having plans for plans is one thing. Actually executing upon them is another. And the Canadian people are not stupid. They are waiting and they are watching, and in the wings is waiting a Conservative Party and government ready to take it on the minute Mr. Carney fails. So in a very funny way, all his perceived strengths are really some of his greatest weaknesses. And I'm looking forward to the fact that we have new media like yourself, which is essential for the Canadian democracy and the health of our regime moving forward. Because right now we have monopolized state media, which makes it impossible to penetrate or to get any message out. So the new media is really essential. It's important that we as conservatives support you guys in everything that you're doing, that we put you to the forefront, that we all share in your success and keep pushing through. And the other aspect will be this new conservative movement of the youth. You know, the left understands something that many people don't, which we are now learning. If you want to win the hearts and minds, not for the short term, not for the medium term, but for the long term, you start with the youth. And it just so happens to be the case, call it providence or chance, that the youth is on our side. And that is a battle that they have, I think, already lost. And it portends well for us in the future and very poorly for them.
Very true. And when someone comes up to you and says, how do I get involved? What direction would you put them in? If they said, Dimpee, I'm fed up, I'm very angry, and I want to make my mark, where would you point them in on how to get involved with politics?
Well, I am very, very selfish. So on one hand, I would absolutely ask that you're subscribing to something like the Canada Strong and Free Network. It is the largest bank of conservatives in the country, and I find it very, very important that we have one central organization, which is key to bringing the entire tent together, which is what Mr. Bullock, the CEO and president of the Canada Strong and Free Network, has really succeeded in doing. So it's very important that you're subscribed to their emails and their messages, that you're attending events, and that we're out there like the left is. Number two, selfishly, I would tell you to join my organization, Allies for a Strong Canada. I'm going to do a little pitch, which is going to seem a little annoying, but I really believe in this organization. I wouldn't be director of engagement if I didn't believe in it. Allies for a Strong Canada, it has one mission and one mission only, which is to defend and preserve Western civilization in Canada. It is not about left or right. It's not Democrat versus Republican. It's not liberal versus conservative. It is the West versus the rest, and it is good versus evil. We are building out an entire army of allies, which you can join at www.theallies.ca. And what we're basically doing is starting a Tea Party movement. So not a moment, but a movement. And we put tremendous pressure on these politicians to get them to understand exactly where our enemies are the most obnoxious, the most organized, and the most well-funded. It gives them the illusion that they're a kind of majority in this nation when they're really not. They're just loud. But that's what Allies is going to circumvent, and what it's already succeeded in doing. We pushed the first campaign out about getting the names, shaming, and deporting the IRGC officials. So much so that in our campaign, which involved having people mass flood by phone call, voicemail, and letters their members of parliament, it was discussed in the Houses of Parliament openly. That was a great win and success of Allies for a Strong Canada. We're doing the same with the CCP infiltration of Canada and pushing our lawmakers towards that. Basically, we're using the tools of the left against the left, and it would be a distinct privilege and honor if your listeners and viewers would sign up and join us. But again, I say keep fighting the good fight, have no fear. The Bible says do not be afraid 365 times for a very, very important reason. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them demoralize you. That's how they win. We win by being happy warriors and having the confidence and belief in the supremacy of our way of life and of Western civilization, of blood and soil, not because of sentiment, but because it is true by nature and by God.
Amazing. Dimpee, I really want to thank you for coming on. I'm so glad we got to do this. I hope I was a great host. Where can people connect with you if they want to say? I think you just did Allies for a Strong Canada, and Canada Strong. The CFS, I see CFSN, Strong and Free Network. So where can people also connect with you and whatnot? Because as I said, I think we're on the verge of a change, and I think it's going to come sooner than later, because I'm also an optimist at the end of the day.
Yes, absolutely. I do actually think it's going to come sooner than later. I think we'll be surprised by how quickly it actually comes. You can find me lurking on Twitter, posting my little articles. I write for various U.S. publications, so you can see my work at The Federalist, The Spectator, Daily Wire, in Canada, The Western Standard, and I've been in the Toronto Sun. You can follow me on Twitter at @IsThisDimpeeB, and I'll spell it out because I have a funny name, but I did not choose it. You can blame my parents. So IsThisDimpeeB. Is this Dimpee B at Twitter, and hopefully I'll be joining you on more of your spaces, because that's what I'm really looking forward to.
Yes, you definitely will. And if you like what I do, guys, make sure to hit the like, share, subscribe to the Drew Experience on all platforms. Same handle. I've made it simple. Drew, I'm going to spell it too. My nickname, because my real name, my birth name is Andrew, but Drew's got a nice ring to it. And the letter X. And the word experience, because when you come on my show, it's an experience of a conversation. So hit that like, share, subscribe button. Dimpee had a blast today. We got more coming in the conservative movement for Canada and the Iranian diaspora with geopolitics and where Canada stands in the 21st century. So do it while you can, because I'm going to be rising like a stock. Okay, I don't want to get too overconfident there. But listen, it's big. I'm independent media, and I'm going to do my part to be a piece to the puzzle. Dimpee, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And as I said, an hour and 10 just flew by like that.
It did. I had such an amazing time. Thank you so much for having me on. And anytime you want to chat, you just give me a call. I loved it.
Perfect. Well, guys, make sure to follow her. Follow Allies for a Strong Canada and Canada Strong. Canada
Strong and Free. The Canada
Strong and Free. And make sure to get involved with your local EDA, as Josh from Elevate says, because that's where you would also learn and meet some great people and become part of a movement that's only growing to save the West and Canada. Drew Experience, out.